If I could ask folks to take their seats, we're going to go ahead and get started in just about 1 minute. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, and welcome to Working Session 15, the specifically selected topic on hate crime. I'm Christina Finch. I'm the head of the Tolerance and Non-Discrimination Department at ODIHR, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this session. Working Session 15 is Hate Crime, a comprehensive approach to addressing hate crimes, the complementary roles of civil society and participating states. In this session, the questions that could be addressed include: how can civil society organizations complement participating states' commitments to combat intolerance and discrimination by monitoring and reporting hate crimes? How can participating states meaningfully support civil society organizations in the sphere of promoting mutual respect and understanding, equal opportunities, and inclusion of all within society? And How can participating states and civil society organizations ensure that their relationship with one another is grounded in the promotion of respect for the inherent dignity of all human beings, including, but not limited to, gender mainstreaming efforts? The session will last 3 hours. The first 15 minutes are dedicated to opening remarks and technical information and remarks by the introducer. I have been told that the speakers list is still open, so please do come see my colleagues behind me if you would like to be added to the list. I would ask all participants to respect the seating arrangements in the plenary hall. It reminds participants that live streaming of the 2019 HGYM is available. Therefore, filming with cameras and video cameras is only permitted by accredited journalists and only during the opening and closing plenary sessions. No other audio-visual recordings should be undertaken without the explicit permission of individuals being recorded. Let me turn now to our introducer. We're very honored to have Dragnina Nadazin join us today. She is the director of Amnesty International Poland since 2007. And since 2015, she also participates in the Amnesty International Regional Oversight Group for Work on Europe. She holds an MA from the University of Warsaw and is an alumni of the School for Human Rights of the Helsinki Foundation and Leadership Academy for Poland. In 2015, she was appointed member of the Social Council at the Polish Ombuds Office, and in 2014 was awarded the Gold Cross of Merit by the Polish president. The floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Moderator, let me express my gratitude for the privilege of addressing the delegation to OSCE and the civil society partners from OSCE countries on this very important topic. The topic of hate crimes, it is important, and I would like here to address the duty to protect people from hate crimes. All my remarks are based on the reports and the conclusions of civil society organizations that are conducted in various OSCE countries. Just let me remind you that under international human rights law, states have an obligation to ensure that their agents and institutions do not discriminate against members of minority or vulnerable groups. States had also positive obligation to protect everyone in their jurisdiction from acts of discrimination carried out by private individuals or groups. This duty to protect applies to hate crimes which are specific manifestation of discrimination. Hate crimes are criminal offenses targeting an individual, a community, or premises because they belong to or are associated with a group defined by one or more protected characteristics such as race, ethnicity, migration status, or sexual orientation or gender identity. Discrimination on the basis of such protected characteristics is prohibited under international human rights law. In order to fulfill their obligation, the authorities should put in place effective mechanisms to prevent, investigate, punish, and provide redress for the harm caused by hate crimes. This should reflect the positive duty of the police to combat hate crimes, and when such crimes are committed, to investigate any possible discriminatory motives behind them. This duty should govern all police actions and be given due consideration when dealing with members of groups experiencing discrimination. In particular, the authorities should adopt law and policies requiring law enforcement and judicial officials to investigate and prosecute as hate crimes all crimes that are partly or wholly motivated by discrimination. They should also monitor the implementation of this law by collecting comprehensive data on hate crimes, which should constitute the basis for adopting informed decisions regarding legal amendments or other policy measures that needed to be in place to combat these crimes. In General Comments number 18, Human Rights Committee of United Nations emphasized that discrimination is any distinction, exclusion, restriction, or preference which is based on any ground such as race, color, sex, language, religion, political or other opinion, national or social origin, property, birth, or other status, and which has the purpose or effect of nullifying or impairing the recognition, enjoyment, or exercise by all persons or an equal footing all rights and freedoms. Adopting of amended the criminal code in which crimes motivated by discrimination on any grounds, including age, disability, gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, and social or economical status, are investigated and prosecuted as hate crimes, is a first step to overcome a legal gap that now exists in many OSCE countries. For example, even in the countries that have a clear definition of the hate crime, but it is very narrow definition that doesn't include hate crimes on the such grounds such as disabilities or homelessness, we can see that hate crimes, even if they are conducted with a clear discriminatory motivation, are not treated as such because they are lacking in a definition in the criminal code. Different definition of hate crimes and how it affects the investigation of the hate crimes in OSCE regions are often the problem of a study of different social partners that we work with. The different definition of hate crimes in OSCE countries lead us to the situation where also it is very difficult to compare the official data. It definitely influenced the data collection. This is one of the reasons why comparison of official statistics of hate crimes is not the best source of information about the real scale of the problem. Let me also emphasize that basic tool to ensure justice and impunity for scale crimes is to highlight their occurrence. Therefore, problem of underreporting hate crimes and reasons why this problem is still having a place should be treated very seriously. Among the reasons of failure to address hate crimes, I would like to emphasize the problem connected with the lack of diligence by police and prosecutors. Shortcomings in the response to hate crimes are numerous. There continue to be the cases where police officials do not carry out effective, prompt, adequate, and thorough investigation into allegations of racistic, xenophobic, or homophobic violence. NGOs and lawyers working on such cases highlight in particular the failure of law enforcement agents to secure evidence, take witnesses' statements, and identify or record possible hate motives in an early stage of investigation. The failures are linked, at least in a part, to the complexity of a country's system for classifying hate crimes. Very often, systems set too high threshold for the initial recording of potential hate motives, and that frontline police officers are not consistently as sensitive to indicators of hate crimes as they should be. Hate motives is often overlooked by judicial authorities, also as a result of a lack of sensitivity and evidence collected in investigation. Impunity for hate crimes results in a lack of trust of other victims of other hate crimes that their experience will be treated properly, and therefore they can also refrain from reporting the crime. Governments should adopt and implement specific measures to protect the right to be free from discrimination and to prevent hate crimes, and this may vary according to particular challenges and other relative circumstances in each country. However, they should at least include criminal provision, including an open-ended list of discriminatory motives based on the protected characteristic under international human rights law, and as a minimum, explicitly comprising age, disability, ethnicity, gender, gender identity, race, religion, sexual orientation, and social and economical status. Whenever there is sufficient evidence of a discriminatory motive associated with a crime, that motive should be also duly taken into account by the courts when sentencing. Last but not least, there also should be unambiguous condemnation of hate crimes by public authorities. As said above, authorities should condemn hate crimes when they occur and make clear that crimes targeting people for discriminatory reasons will not be tolerated. Having said that, I have to admit that political leaders can not only do much better in this regard, but they also must stop encouraging hateful behavior toward minority groups. The global trends of more divisive politics was exemplified by political leaders' rhetoric also in the OSCE region, when we can also see that political leaders use the narratives of fear, blame, and division. This rhetoric is having an increasingly pervasive impact on policy and actions. Governments in Croatia and Hungary turn on refugees and migrants, treating them as an easy target for scapegoating. The accounts of abusive practice are sufficiently frequent to point to a potentially systematic and deliberate policy of Croatian authorities designed to discourage new arrivals of refugees and migrants. The documented cases of police beating or intimidating people, burning their shoes and warm clothes, and forcing them to walk barefoot in sub-zero temperatures and through nearly frozen rivers could amount to cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. Therefore, Croatian authorities should immediately stop using physical violence and intimidation at the border and promptly and impartially investigate all allegations of abuse and ill treatment and take action against perpetrators. Hateful pre-election rhetoric against LGBT plus people in Poland and violent attacks against participants of Pride March in Białystok are the two sides of the same coin. Criminalization of homelessness in Hungary put homeless people in this country in extreme difficult situation as potential victims of hate crimes. As emphasized by Ms. Leani Parha, UN Special Rapporteur on Adequate Housing, when vulnerable and marginalized individuals who are themselves products of growing socioeconomic inequalities are subjected to increased violence and hatred, and when government reinforces these patterns by penalizing homeless people or making them disappear from public view by removing them from public places, these are the matters of the gravest human rights concerns. Authorities should refrain from feeding negative narratives concerning refugees and migrants, LGBT people, homeless people, and members of any other minority group, and instead provide them with an enabling environment when they can live and operate free of fear. Let me mention an example of Pride and Equality marches. The local and national authorities that ban the Pride marches should understand that Pride events are about human rights. They empower LGBT individuals to reclaim the rights and freedom that they are denied and the public space they are often excluded from. Visibility is crucial, especially when the state and opposition groups go to considerable lengths to put LGBT people and the margins of society. Fighting the shame and social stigma and marching in the face of threat and violence. Pride parades are not only inspiring celebration of difference, but also a declaration of intent. By supporting these events, authorities can show that they are committed to equality and human rights and aiming to prevent hate crimes. If they do not do so, I fear that division in society will only deepen and the problem of hate crimes will only grow. It is critical now that states and civil society send a joint message that hate crimes will not be tolerated and show this message in practice. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you also for highlighting the problem of underreporting of hate crime and the role of both government authorities and civil society in creating a climate of tolerance and non-discrimination to ensure that hate crimes do not occur and do not escalate. At this point, I'll be turning to the speakers list. The allotted time for interventions during this session will be 3.5 minutes. I would remind all participants that all interventions should be presented in a meaningful, orderly, and respectful manner, observing the time limit and focusing on recommendations related to the topic of the session. Please keep comments brief and to the point, starting with the recommendations related to the session's topic. Criticism is welcome, but should be constructive. Please do not read lengthy statements. If you have statements, however, do submit them to the interpreters before you take the floor, and your full statements can be distributed via the document distribution desk in the event you are not allowed to finish your statement. I would remind participants that you can only speak in the capacity in which you are registered, and only entities registered on the speaker list can take the floor. I remind representatives of the participating states that points of order can only relate to procedural issues. When it comes to the substance of the matter under discussion, they are welcome to use the right of reply. However, I will remind participants of the topic of this session, which is hate crimes and the role of civil society, the complementary roles of civil society and participating states, and would ask you to stay on topic. If you're not on topic, I will intervene to ask you to return to the topic in question. If you remain off topic, I will have no choice but to move down to the list to the next speaker. With this, I turn to the speakers list. The first speaker is the Fund for Legal Support and Protection of Compatriots' Rights Abroad, to be followed by the Center for Development of Humanistic Ecology and Culture. The Fund for Legal Support and Protection of Compatriots' Rights Abroad, you have the floor.
Madam Moderator, distinguished colleagues, the establishment of a universal system of human rights protection was one of the main achievements of the Second World War, and will be in fact commemorating the 75th anniversary of the end of that conflict this year. Humanity must not forget the awful repercussions of attempts to assume world hegemony, believing in your own exceptionalism while disregarding human rights and morals. Representatives of civil society, various associations of Russian-speaking national minorities in Europe, as well as other organizations, have on numerous occasions underscored the need to pay particular attention to aggressive nationalism and neo-Nazism in the OSCE. We're seriously concerned about the glorification of the Nazis, including during demonstrations. Every year in Latvia, on the 16th of March, and this has been happening for decades, there are Waffen-SS gatherings. In Tori, in Estonia, there's a temple, in fact, which was the church visited by the 20th Division SS Estland. And there was recently a ceremony to pay tribute to Unterscharführer SS Harald Nuginsek, Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, according to the Minister of Defense of Estonia.
Crime and the role of civil society and
Yes,
government
of course,
officials.
because
Thank you so much.
hate crime, this mostly, obviously, clearly shown in neo-Nazist movement, which I am trying to speak against. Открыто возглавляет.
Furthermore, the Estonian authorities have tried to justify all of these incidents, saying that Estonian SS officers did not commit war crimes, and therefore the Nuremberg decisions do not apply to them. However, the Nuremberg Tribunal unequivocally recognized all members of the SS as being criminals. Furthermore, Estonia was one of the first countries which was occupied by Nazi Germany. And in fact, what's also happened is that the current authorities in the Ukraine have proclaimed that the former head of the Lvov division of SS Galician, Evgeny Kunitsyn, as a champion of independence. These are in fact people who aided and abetted the fascists. For instance, there's now a memorial to SS Galician in Lvov. What we're doing is whitewashing history. In 2016 alone, over 900 settlements were renamed. Over 50,000 streets were also renamed, and over 2,000 memorials to Soviet soldiers who liberated Ukraine. They were taken down, and this despite the fact that roughly 7 million Ukrainians served in the Red Army. And in fact, many of their children and grandchildren now live in Ukraine. Of late, we've also had reports from the UN High Commissioner about crimes committed on the Ukrainian side.
I now give the floor to the Center for Development of Humanistic Ecology and Culture, to be followed by the Russian Federation.
Madam Moderator, dear participants, in my statement, I would like to draw attention to the incorrect understanding of the concept of a secular society, which can in fact result in discrimination against believers, Christians in particular, and that results in an increase, a corresponding increase in the number of hate crimes. Now, this concept of secularity arose in the 17th and 18th centuries in Europe, and at the time people understood that a secular society was a good way of reducing the risk of religious conflict. And the principle of a secular society was in fact taken up by societies with a Christian tradition. The value of the individual and her or his human rights is something that was promoted by Christianity in Europe. And the concept of a secular society consists in the fact that no one has a single worldview imposed upon her or him. And yet today that's taking on a new form because it's aggressive, even militant secularity or secularism. And that simply is a distortion of the original concept. It's not correct. And this is resulting in Christianophobia, which occurs in Europe as well. There is a discrimination against Christians in the fields of culture, of education. The positions of believers are considered, for some reason, to be less valuable than the worldviews of people who are less religious. So there is a sort of a double standard to hate crimes. The terrorists in Charlie Hebdo resulted in a lot of expressions of solidarity, whereas attacks on Christian churches, the creation of Christian martyrs with Christian victims, these are considered to be commonplace crimes rather than hate crimes. And unfortunately, this relates not only to religious symbols, which is something that could be understood with a view to assuring secularity. Now, and of course, another shocking form of lack of respect for Christian believers is the participation, sometimes forced participation, in certain events which simply are unacceptable for individuals who believe in the Christian faith. So respect for religious ideals is not incompatible with secularity, but it is beginning to disappear. Yuri Gagarin, the cosmonaut, the Soviet cosmonaut, said that in the Russian Federation there should be a Christ the Savior Church. So our recommendations, we would call on the OSCE to combat Christianophobia and to make sure that the concept of secularity is not used as a pretext to discriminate against religious believers. Thank you for your attention.
I now give the floor to the Russian Federation, to be followed by the European Center for Democracy Development.
Moderator, dear colleagues, next year we'll be celebrating the 75th anniversary of the victory over Nazism. In this respect, it is frightening to observe the increase in hate incidents, often in the form of anti-Semitism. And this is spurred by a growing support for neo-Nazi groups in a number of OSCE countries. Anti-Semitism has reached a new level in the European Union. According to the FRA agency, this is a growing trend in Great Britain, Poland, Belgium, France, and the Federal Republic of Germany. In France and in Germany, the number of violent incidents against Jews increased by 84% and 37% respectively. And this, of course, is due to the growth in right-wing movements. And in this regard, the fact that the European Parliament now has neo-Nazi right-wing parties, such as Alternative für Deutschland, is really very frightening. Xenophobia is also spurred by the fact that glorification of Waffen-SS veterans in Latvia and Estonia has become the norm. The authorities are taking no measures to prevent this, and I would like to remind the Baltic colleagues of the fact that glorification of Nazism, its propaganda, its symbols, is just one step to the actual manifestation of intolerance and hate crimes, neo-Nazi crimes. Unfortunately, Ukraine does not really remember this either. Radical statements by highly placed officials calling for xenophobia and inter-ethnic hostility are distinctive features of the authorities in Kiev. And Ukrainian radicals are causing suffering of Russian-speaking population, of Roma and Sinti, and of Jews in 2018-2019. Extremists carried out dozens of attacks on Roma and Sinti camps. Now, of course, none of the perpetrators was brought to justice. And there's more and more anti-Semitism in Ukraine as well. In just the last month, there were at least 3 incidents of desecration of monuments to the victims of the Holocaust in the Nikolaevsky and Kirovohradsky Oblast. And this is also true of attacks on believers in the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church. The reality of the threat of growth of Nazism is something that has been recognized by the United Nations and the European Parliament. That is the point of the annual resolution in the General Assembly of the United Nations on combating the glorification of Nazism, which most countries vote for. And in this regard, we would also like to remind you that it is unacceptable to rewrite the history of the Second World War, to deny the Holocaust, and to glorify accomplices of fascism. Playing games with neo-Nazis leads to an increase in the number of hate crimes which OSCE participating states are duty-bound to combat. The full text will be submitted to the Secretariat. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the European Center for Democracy Development, to be followed by the Association of Tajiks in Kazakhstan.
Thank you very much. Our organization monitors xenophobia and hate crime. However, at the outset, I wanted to say a few words to the representative of Georgia regarding the previous statement. I had family who perished in Tsinvali in 2008 because they were shot, they were shelling from Gore. 2 days later, Russian forces entered South Ossetia. They were greeted as liberators. They would save these people from annihilation. A few years later, the European Parliament adopted a resolution recognizing the fact that it was Georgia which initiated military action against South Ossetia. Next, I was surprised to hear what the Ukrainian police representative said. He said that no one has been persecuted because they're speaking Russian, but no one said that. What we said is that you have a law on the use of the Ukrainian language as a state language, and in fact, someone can be put away for 10 years if you defend multilingualism. It's the same sentence as for overthrowing the constitutional order. That's the long and short of it. I was also baffled when I heard that hate crime in Ukraine is in fact ebbing in Ukraine while it is on the rise in the Russian Federation. Colleagues, please look up the statistics. They're available online. Get the data. In 2018, the Public Prosecutor's Office in Ukraine registered 82 instances of discrimination based on one of the articles of the Criminal Code, which is a 50% increase year on year. By the end of that period, no decisions were taken on 78 of those cases. That means that in 1 out of 20 cases is someone convicted. In many cases, these crimes are not even investigated. What crimes am I referring to? Well, let me tell you. 2 instances of the Hungarian Cultural House in Zakarpattia was set ablaze. Bombs were placed in that same cultural center. In Lvov, we had anti-Polish flyers which were distributed. Also, the S14 organization attacked Roma camps in Kiev. Nemezida, that organization set ablaze Roma dwellings in Kiev. Odessa, nationalists there in fact organized a demonstration where they were calling for people to physically harm Russians. But all of this is falling on deaf ears. Turning now to the Russian statistics, there was a decrease of roughly 10% in the number of hate crimes, and most of the hate crimes were not violent. According to the Public Prosecutor's Office, for H1 2019, there was a 58% drop in such crimes vis-a-vis the same period in 2018. Hate crime in Ukraine, well, there's been so many crimes that I can't list them all. However, most instances of aggression motivated by nationalist sentiment were directed against Turks, Roma, and Hungarians. I call on the OSCE to draw particular attention to this issue and to turn all of these accusations into convictions. Thank you.
Much. I give the floor now to the Association of Tajiks in Kazakhstan, to be followed by Rights and Prosperity.
Уважаемая госпожа.
Madam Moderator, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. At the present time, criminality in all states does exist. Now, to combat criminality, you need to have a stable state. And I think that for the entire society to fight against criminality in Kazakhstan, for instance, you need the right structures. And today, the political will is in place that needs to be fully implemented for peace and stability. After the decomposition of the Soviet Union, Kazakhstan was the only state to give up its nuclear weapons in favor of peace. It is a hospitable country, and it combats criminality, and this is an effort that is supported by the entire population of the country. The Assembly of Nations in Kazakhstan works very well. People interact with one another. They live in peace, stability, and friendship. Thanks to very good counteractive efforts, criminality has declined. We support the policy of the government to combat criminality. But unfortunately, there are small groups like the Islamic Renaissance Party that is attracting young Tajiks to its ranks and taking them down the wrong path. Thank you.
I now give the floor to Rights and Prosperity, to be followed by the Interregional Social Movement for Democracy and Human Rights.
Благодарю.
Thank you. Distinguished participants. Hate crimes. In fact, there is a very specific definition of what a hate crime is. So in order to bandy about these terms, we need to come to grips with what is actually behind this term. As things stand, Tajikistani legislation, including the constitution, guarantees that these kinds of acts will be prevented at the legislative level. In order to pinpoint whether a hate crime is systemic in nature, what is advisable is that together with civil society, we conduct a study to determine whether hate crime affects all groups throughout society. We have seen instances of hate crime targeting specific individuals, but it's very difficult to understand what the scale of the problem is. We need to understand what motivates people to commit such crimes, social factors, economic factors, domestic disputes, or perhaps something else altogether. However, it's very difficult to describe hate crime as being systematic, as being a mass phenomenon, as things currently stand. Moreover, if I may, I do want to tell you about something positive, a positive development in Tajikistan. In Dushanbe, a mosque has been operating since 2009, and it's the Jumu'at Mosque. In fact, it's a current of Islam, and this mosque has been up and running for a number of years now, as I said. In fact, in the near future, there will be a much bigger mosque that will be opened up. So that's just to put something on the positive side of the ledger, showing how, if there's the political will, different currents within Islam can coexist peacefully. That's a practical example. Another issue I wanted to flag up, as I still have some time. First and foremost, I wanted to say that hate crime is, when it boils down to it, it's tolerance. During the morning session, I heard some of the speakers brandishing individuals and groups with the very, very insulting adjectives. For instance, some NGOs were called fake NGOs. That's very insulting. Some speakers were accused of lying. And in fact, when we prepare our statements, we make sure that no doubt can be cast on the veracity of what we're saying. As a civil society representative representing an NGO that's been active in Tajikistan for over 20 years, working on refugees, torture, very sensitive issues, statelessness, and so on, when you call us fake NGOs, that's insulting. We invite you to look at the work we've done on combating torture. We've got a website you can look at. We believe that it's unacceptable that people make such statements, and I call on the organizers to clamp down on such statements. Thank you.
Movement for Democracy and Human Rights, to be followed by the Holy See.
Уважаемые дамы,
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to draw your attention to hate crimes committed against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. There have been 25 takeovers of churches. There have been churches burned down, various cases of vandalism, 56 cases of attacks on the personnel of the church, setting up billboards and taking out advertisements in newspapers that criticize the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And many of the perpetrators of these incidents, or the supporters of them, actually come from government circles. The Ukrainian party in January 2018 in several regions of Ukraine, Kiev, Chernihiv, Kharkiv, Odessa, Kanatop, Cherkasy, Khmelnytsky, Kremenchuk, Lvov. There, the Yuri Gudymenko, in 2012, he was the deputy leader of a political party, and in 2015, he was in charge of Poroshenko's party in one of the regions, and he has distributed a lot of hatred speech about the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. There has been this decision to set up a new church, and there continues to be a language of hatred, of defamation in Ukrainian mass media, including Ukrinform, the government press agency. The church is referred to as a fifth column. It is accused of financing extremists and terrorists. And as a consequence of this, we have all of these incidents that I've mentioned, with the churches being burned down and so on. Now, the full text will be made available to the Secretariat for publication on the site of the conference. Thank you for your attention.
I'll give the floor to the Holy See, to be followed by the NGO Anti-Fascist Human Rights League.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. The Holy See notes with alarm that Christians are targeted of hate crimes across the OSCE region. Data collected and made available by the ODIHR indicate that anti-Christian hate crimes mainly and increasingly target places of worship, cemeteries, and other properties, even where Christians are in the majority. My delegation wishes to underline the importance of data collection in order to understand and address hate crimes. Recognizing, recording, and reporting such crimes is an important way for participating states to acknowledge the problem and its extent, as well as to develop strategies to prevent and counter it. In particular, the Holy See wishes to recall that by Ministerial Council Decision 9/09, participating states have committed themselves to collect, maintain, and make public disaggregated data on hate crimes. Therefore, participating states are required: 1. To collect and report to ODIHR reliable data on hate crimes. 2. To disaggregate the data on hate crimes motivated by religious bias or prejudice. 3. Disaggregate among these data those on anti-Semitic hate crimes, those on hate crimes against Muslims, those on hate crimes against Christians, and those on hate crimes against the members of other religions. Since from the official data from the ODIHR, we may see that just about 1 in 5 of participating states provide such disaggregation, we all understand that after 10 years from the Athens decision, much work still needs to be done in this respect. However, it is very well known that official data are an unreliable indicator of the true extent of criminal behavior. Because of the limitations of police-recorded crime data, A number of participating states use victimization surveys to estimate more accurately the prevalence of hate crimes. In this regard, as we observed in a recent paper of DODIR, it is important to keep in mind that victimization surveys mainly research crimes that are directed at individual members of the community, while they are not appropriate for crimes targeting entire communities, such as crimes targeting properties or associated to or a certain community. Since the vast majority of anti-Semitic hate crimes and hate crimes motivated by religious bias or prejudice are perpetrated against properties and not against people, this means that victimization surveys are not able to intercept all these crimes, which remain unrecorded and underestimated. Therefore, specific measures have to be taken in order to survey carefully also hate crimes perpetrated against religious properties. In conclusion, anti-Semitic hate crimes and hate crimes motivated by religious bias or prejudice are widely under-recorded and more numerous than those indicated in the annual reporting of DODIR. Therefore, they deserve more attention, particularly since they represent a phenomenon that could threaten the security and the stability of the region, triggering violence and conflict on a wider scale, thus putting in danger the peaceful relation among the states. The full text of the statement will be circulated. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to NGO Anti-Fascist Human Rights League, to be followed by Public Organization Peace Initiatives Development.
Уважаемый председатель,
Madam Moderator, distinguished participants, despite the fact that the Ukrainian constitution states that Ukraine is a secular state where there is the freedom of religion, the previous administration of Mr. Poroshenko saw meddling in the work of Christian communities, resulting in discord in Ukraine. The establishment of a new Orthodox Church in Ukraine as a legal entity did not occur. As a result, we had violence waged against churches by people in uniform. This was a violation of the law and, in fact, a hate crime motivated by religion. For instance, the Church of the Kiev Patriarchate, headed up by Filaret, also saw instances of violence, fighting, and so on and so forth. The Ukrainian Orthodox Church has been attacked, and 20 million believers have seen their rights violated. Right-wing radicals have beaten up religious leaders and believers. And this despite the fact that there was not a single Orthodox church in the world that recognized this new Ukrainian church apart from that of Bartholomew. In 2019, for instance, the Church of the Canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church was seized by force. Also, this year, a Church of the Kiev Patriarchate and those who have switched to the new church also committed offences. And what happened was that law enforcement officers did not prevent the committing of these crimes. Another instance, in 2019, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church's supporters seized a temple, once again by force. Neo-Nazis, this is another instance, together with members of this new Orthodox Church in Ukraine, initiated a physical fight with representatives of another church. The police arrived on the scene, but instead of restoring order, they joined the ranks of the neo-Nazis and beat up the parishioners of the other church and the priest as well. Also, right-wing radicals, at the behest of Oleg Kovalsky, who's a right-wing MP, they called for attacks to be committed against some churches. When this church was stormed, there was a woman who was trying to protect the temple, and she was beaten up by this MP. He punched her in the shoulder, in the stomach, and then kicked her when she fell to the floor. In 2019, we had another instance where members of the New Ukrainian Orthodox Church tried to seize another temple in another part of the country, and what we saw was that religious leaders were attacked, they had their crosses ripped off them, their fingers broken, they were beaten. Also, on the 11th of August 2019, we had, I want to say that as a result of the activity of
The next speaker,
Моє
which is the
виступлення
public.
my statement will be submitted to the Secretariat.
Thank you. Public organization Peace Initiatives Development, to be followed by the United States of America.
Добрий день,
Good afternoon, dear participants. Today in Ukraine, there are destructive processes of disintegration of the society. There's more and more violence on ethnic, religious, and other grounds. These lines of division have been a historical fact in the past, but after the so-called Euromaidan, this has become more intense, and it's a great danger for the future of the country. The decision to integrate with Europe in 2014, ignoring the majority view in the population, has resulted in these lines of division. There is more and more Russophobia and a growth in extreme right-wing parties that has resulted in a growth in intolerance, discrimination on religious and ideological grounds, and more hate crimes in Ukraine as a result. In recent years, human rights organizations have reported a number of incidents, attacks on Roma and Sinti and other groups that have different views. There is prosecution of individuals for political reasons. There are threats of assassination by right-wing parties of political opponents. And this is a form of hate crime, and this is being supported by silence by the official authorities. Much of the ideological and racist hate crimes are simply not investigated. So there is more and more division in Ukraine. This is a violation of the basic rights of Ukrainian citizens, and it is a threat to Ukrainian statehood. I draw the attention of the international community to these processes in Ukraine, and I hope that something will be done to improve the human rights situation in my country. Thank you.
United States of America, to be followed by the Yazidi Center for Human Rights.
In one voice, our nation must condemn racism, bigotry, and white supremacy. These sinister ideologies must be defeated. Hate has no place in America. These were the words of the President of the United States in response to the tragic August shootings in El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio, that resulted in the deaths and wounding of over 80 people. In what appears to be a worrying trend, hate ideologies are becoming increasingly prevalent, fueling bias-motivated hate crimes and other violence by self-proclaimed white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and others who would believe white people are a dominant race, losing its place and status in the world. The consequences have been deadly throughout the OSCE region. At the 2017 Unite the Right rally, which resulted in the tragic murder of Heather Heyer and injuries of many others by a motor vehicle, white supremacists chanted the slogan, "Jews will not replace us." A contender in the 2019 Danish elections held Quran-burning demonstrations in Muslim-majority neighborhoods. The ultimately unsuccessful candidate declared, "Civil war is coming," and called for a ban on Islam and the deportation of the country's more than 300,000 Muslims. British parliamentarian Joe Cox's murder had ties to US-based neo-Nazi groups and shouted, "Britain first," as he shot and stabbed her in 2016, purportedly for her pro-migrant political stances. German politician Walter Lübcke was assassinated in June 2019, and German Mayor Andreas Holstein was stabbed in 2017, both targeted for their pro-refugee views. We note the effort of German authorities to investigate whether these crimes have ties to a larger network, including in 2011, when German authorities uncovered that a neo-Nazi group had, for over a decade, murdered and injured close to a dozen people they perceived to be migrants, as well as police involved with the cases. We are greatly concerned by the increase in hate-motivated violence towards political figures, and note recent testimony from the U.S. Capitol Police before the Congressional House Administration Committee that cited more than 2,500 cases of threats against members of Congress this year so far. All of these examples suggest a greater need for law enforcement cooperation that focuses on perpetrators of bias-motivated crimes within and across borders to enhance security throughout the OSCE region. We support the OSCE program building a comprehensive criminal justice response to hate crime, turning words into action, and other ODIHR projects which build the capacity of participating states to implement their tolerance and security commitments, in part by strengthening the activities of law enforcement and justice officials to address bias-motivated crimes. With the growth of intolerance in the region, participating states must increasingly work together to address the problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the Yazidi Center for Human Rights, to be followed by Unconstrained Analytics, Inc. The Yazidi Center for Human Rights, you have the floor.
Human Rights Center, yeah? In Tajik.
No, the Yazidi Center for Human Rights. Seeing that they are not in the room, I will move on to Unconstrained Analytics, Inc., to be followed by AMISCO, European Muslim Initiative for Social Cohesion.
Thank you, Madam Moderator, ladies and gentlemen. There is a disfavored way to understand the hate crime campaign that recognizes it as a bundle of attack narratives designed to suppress free expression. Allow me to explain. Aufheben der Kultur, negate the culture, is a process, a systematic negation of cultures. Have you ever noticed that multiculturalism always seems to mean every culture but your own, whatever culture that might be? This reflects the Marcusean application of narratives operationalized by Marcuse and repressive tolerance, where words mean their opposites, such that tolerance is a deliberate intolerance of the existing social order, whatever social order that may be. And hence, multiculturalism becomes the imposition of a hostile group on a target group for the purpose of destroying it through dialectical negation. Alongside these narratives, hate speech memes serve as an enforcement mechanism through the direct application of Habermas's discourse theory of imposed consensus designed to suppress dissent. Of course, this is undertaken by those positioned to self-empower themselves to make such determinations as to which cultures are to be destroyed. There are many ways to interpret OSCE language, like commitment to respect human rights and fundamental freedoms for all without distinction. Who wouldn't support this? I certainly do. But there is a growing perception that the tolerance being expressed in forums like the OSCE leaves them feeling on the suppressed side of the repressive tolerance formulas. The concern is that the language of tolerance is being purposely repurposed through cynical narratives that turn such ennobling aspirations on their head. The pall of Marcuse's repressive tolerance hangs in this forum. To quote Marcuse, the conclusion reached is that the realization of the objective of tolerance would call for intolerance towards certain attitudes and opinions. Liberating tolerance then would mean intolerance against movements from the right and toleration of movements from the left. The reason so many find themselves surprised when designated as members of the right is because that term, like racism and xenophobia, are simply applied to those who would refuse to conform to repressive tolerance regimes that seek to deny people, cultures, and nations of their identity. Aufheben der Kultur is about the destruction of cultures through the destruction of identity. Unconstrained Analytics recommends that the OSCE and all participating states undertake an inventory of racism, xenophobia, and discrimination narratives to determine whether they have indeed crossed over to the repressive tolerance application of the term. After all, delegates of participating states are supposed to represent their people, not destroy them. Thank you.
I now give the floor to EMISCO, European Muslim Initiative for Social Cohesion, to be followed by Pax Europa.
Respected Chairman, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we all know that most European countries...
I have a point, pardon me? I
Yeah.
have a point of order. Yes, please.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt the speaker, but the screen that we use to follow the speakers just went black.
I note your point of order and return the floor to the speaker.
We all know that most European countries have accepted Islam as part of their societies. That is why it is strange that anti-Muslim hate crimes are increasing more and more. Many European politicians from various parties use far-right ideology to fuel the anti-Muslim attitudes. By doing so, they are responsible for the incitement to hate that we experience in the societies. This narrative also denies Muslims their fundamental right of freedom of religion and belief. When this fundamental right is denied by the authoritative political figures, Nazism and far-right groups appear and become widespread in Europe. Would any responsible person really wish such nations where far-right ideology is normalized? I do not think so. Here, I would insist that what happened in New Zealand and in Norway shouldn't be forgotten. The Europeans need to be aware that domestic terrorism that daily happens in USA and by white nationalists is also possible in Europe. It is just a matter of time, and if the Europeans do not speak out against racism, hate crimes, discrimination and hate speech, anti-Muslim hate crimes will be normalized and become widespread. I call on the OSCE participating states and the ODIHR to act upon all the suggestions they receive at the event like this. Our recommendations are as follows. First, political leaders should speak out against anti-Muslim hate crimes publicly through media and social media. Secondly, emphasizes more on the issue of Islamophobia. It is visibly present and is also increasing in our society. Anti-Muslim racism needs to be fought as passionately as anti-Semitism, homophobia, and gender inequality. I also want to point out that at this morning's hearing we heard the speeches of some accredited civil society NGOs who are twisting the reality. In particular, they stated that there is no provision of hate crime or Islamophobia in the context of the law. Reality is that everyday Muslims, especially females, are attacked verbally and physically for Islamophobic reasons. To say that there is no Islamophobia is based on ignorance of the fact and how Islamophobia is practiced in today's society. There are many international reports and surveys that have proven beyond doubt that Islamophobia is alive and kicking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Pax Europa, to be followed by Bivgang Gleik Mokleiken for all.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. In the previous session, it was noted that I argued there was a lack of definition for hate crime. This is not true. What I argued was that there is no legal definition of the word hate as an emotion. The agenda for this session raises the question on how participating states are establishing and intensifying cooperation between and among civil society to promote tolerance and non-discrimination. Pax Europa notes that there is a strong tendency that this very implementation has been leading to the curtailing of freedom of expression, specifically the exercise of prior restraint or self-censorship, primarily in countries west of Vienna. Secondly, as we have just been given a sense for the role repressive tolerance plays in turning tolerance upside down, we all know what it means, and we all know why it isn't stated. Because if people understood what was meant, better yet, if you actually knew what it could mean, you would know that it can be a direct assault on freedom of expression, and the people would know to reject it because it gives the state the arbitrary power to criminalize any activity or expression for any reason or no reason at all. This is repressive tolerance made real, and Marcuse would be very proud. Pax Europa recommends that OSCE participating states take a crash course on the abusive language that brings about the abuse of power as executed by those blindly following the narrative. Thank you very much.
I now give the floor to Bivgang Mokleiken for all, to be followed by the International Association of Independent Democrats Against Authoritarian Regimes.
Госпожа модератор,
Madam Moderator, colleagues, equal opportunities for all, I'll begin my statement with the recommendations and then I'll move on to my comments. To the delegation of Uzbekistan, we demand that you provide information about where Mr. Eshov is. How is he doing? How's his health? Where is he? You see, Mr. Eshov was unlawfully convicted and sentenced to capital punishment. That's the first thing. Second of all, we call on you to stop using criminals in the fight against civil society, religious activists, and bloggers. You see, the security service of Uzbekistan has come up with a project. And this project involves using criminals to clamp down on dissenters. We've got the facts, we've got the evidence, we've got the proof, we've published it. Therefore, we need to put an end to this practice. When President Mirziyoyev acceded to power in Uzbekistan, the mafia has returned to Uzbekistan.
Thank you. Ms. Moderator, if you would kindly request the speaker to keep up to the topic of the meeting, please.
The point of order is noted. I would remind the speaker that the topic is hate crime and the role of civil society and governments. Thank you.
Yes, I am sticking to the topic. You see, hate crime is being committed at the highest possible level. It's being committed by the state against the people. So let's not let our emotions run high. I would like to call on the Uzbek authorities to exercise their right of reply rather than interrupting me. We also call on a dialogue to begin between the opposition, which I represent, and the authorities. The OSCE needs to act as an intermediary. You see, the Uzbek authorities are not ready to take part in this dialogue. Third, we want the opposition to once again be able to operate in Uzbekistan. We want the opposition to take part in elections, both parliamentary and presidential. According to the statistics, there are roughly 10,000 NGOs.
Is hate crime, a comprehensive approach, the complementary roles of civil society and participating states, and ask the speaker to return to the topic. Thank you very much. I return the floor to you, Speaker.
Thank you very much for reminding me of that, Madam Moderator, but I am in fact sticking to the topic. There are roughly 10,000 NGOs registered in Uzbekistan. However, it is the intelligence services which oversee these civil society bodies. So it's very difficult for these NGOs to address sensitive issues. Therefore, we have to use information from citizens who send this information to us. And this is why we're raising these sensitive issues.
Thank you very much.
I do apologize. I'm not done. I have 32 seconds left. Moving on. You see, in Uzbekistan, the people of Uzbekistan live in total fear of the state, of the official authorities, both past and present.
With all due respect, Ms. Moderator, you could use your full powers to return the speaker to the topic of the session, please.
I note the point of order. The speaker has been asked to return to topic several times. I'm now moving on to the next speaker on the list. I give the floor to the International Association of Independent Democrats Against Authoritarian Regimes, to be followed by the European Yozgat Federation.
Thank you. There are dictatorship states, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and aggressive Russia, and again Uzbekistan. Kazakhstan has the authoritarian system again, but we hope Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan have the way of the opportunity to the democracy. Dear participant, what is the hate crime? The introducer had the answer. We see the hate is the method of dictatorship states, because all activity of the same power founded on the hate. It is the method for the struggle against the democratic people, the method for the next repression. You hear example. All dictatorships have the same activity, and his activity is the hate crime. It is reality. All dictatorship structure, from mass media to prosecutor office, use the method of the hate activity for the persecution of democratic person, democratic opposition. We know about different method of the production of the hate by dictatorship states. We ask, we appeal to the democratic state. Please remember that the hate crime, it is activity of dictatorship first of all. And next, after the speech introducer, the attention of the state structure. We have questioned our Belarusian member. Dear participant, from the democracy, please your opinion. Is it the hate crime of the government structure or no? If the Belarusian person in Poland has the total discrimination for 17 years, if the Polish official ban a trial for the protection of the dignity of the Belarusian activist, first of all, this illegal method. And next, is it the hate crime or no? If the Polish official published in newspaper Rzeczpospolita the hate article, the defamation against the Belarusian nation, that Belarusian people don't wish to have self-state. Maybe say activity is another definition, the Polish chauvinism to Belarusian people. We have document, recommendation. All states, first of all, dictatorship state, must implement standard OSCE, and all states must support NGO activity for combating against hate crime. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to the European Yozgat Federation, to be followed by Armenia.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren,
Ladies and gentlemen, many thanks for once again giving me the opportunity to speak. In Austria, the Freedom Party continues to mock Muslims, especially Muslims of Turkish extraction. It calls them benefit scroungers. It does this on a daily basis. Online, every day there are posts put up by people who hate the fact that there are foreigners in Austria. As a consequence, it appears that people of Turkish extraction cannot be fully fledged members of society. In the media too, instead of discussing economic and social problems, there's a lot of discussion over Turks. When the Turks when they object, they are accused of fomenting hate and are invited to leave the country. That is the state of play, and that is the situation which Austrians of Turkish extraction are currently facing. It's possible that if we tally the facts, that is the only option on the table for Austrians of Turkish extractions, which is, of course, most unpleasant. We hope that the Freedom Party will soon be prohibited, or at least suspended, until it decides to show respect for the law, until it decides to put an end to its defamation of Austrians of Turkish extraction. We're in favor of peace, not hate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Armenia, to be followed by the CJ Foundation.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Crimes against humanity and genocides can be prevented by combating hate crimes, racism and xenophobia, and by addressing identity-based violations of human rights. Genocide remembrance and education are essential part of the OSCE commitments, also reflected in Ljubljana Ministerial Council decision, which is strongly interlinked to preventing of hate crimes. Glorification of hate crimes, impunity, and justification of atrocities and genocides are the main obstacles to in prevention. Our experience lies behind special responsibility of Armenia to stand at the forefront of genocide prevention efforts, and we continue to actively contribute to international efforts. The third Global Forum Against the Crime of Genocide held in Armenia in December 2018 became an important forum to address, among other pertinent issues, topic of prevention of hate crimes, remembrance, and education. In the framework of the OSCE, Armenia promotes the topic of combating hate crimes, targeting ethnic and religious groups. Last year, during the OSCE Ministerial Council in Milan, Armenia, jointly with Cyprus, came up with an initiative to mark the 70th anniversary of the UN Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. We are pleased that in their joint statements, the vast majority of the OSCE participating states welcomed the proclamation by the UN General Assembly of 9 December as the International Day of Commemoration and Dignity of the Victims of the Crime of Genocide, and committed to intensify activities aimed at full implementation of their obligations under the Convention. And finally, I would like to make the following recommendation. OSCE institutions, in particular ODIHR, should streamline in its activities genocide remembrance and education, including human rights education for prevention of the hate crimes. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to the CJ Foundation, to be followed by Information Group on Crimes Against the Person.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and ladies and gentlemen. I am Dave Petties of the CJ Foundation. Hate crime can be viewed through the lens of Marxist Hegelian dialectics. Hate crimes and hate speech are the antithesis to freedom and freedom of speech, structured to negate and erase them. The false binary: you must support our hate crimes line of effort, or you are a person who supports racism, xenophobia, discrimination, etc. Any option to just defend free speech is absent. This erasure and negation uses Marxist critical theory and repressive tolerance. Oppose the Marxist agenda and you are criticized, ridiculed, and torn down without mercy. Support the agenda, you get a free pass. This explains precisely the asymmetry in enforcing these hate crime laws. Many of the 40,000 London knife attacks fit the definition of hate crimes, but are not classified as such. Yet the Metropolitan Police prosecute the victims for offensive Facebook or Twitter posts that are deemed incitement to hatred and discrimination. The crimes themselves are just dismissed as part and parcel of living in a big city. The CJ Foundation warns the people in the OSCE area that this dialectic is an existential threat to Western civilization. If nothing is done, it will usher in a totalitarian dark age that may last 1,000 years. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
I now give the floor to Information Group on Crimes Against the Person, to be followed by the Islamic Renaissance Party of Tajikistan.
Уважаемая госпожа модератор.
Madam Moderator, dear colleagues, in this situation of social conflict in Ukraine, it's particularly important to investigate crimes, especially hate crimes. But the authorities of Ukraine are constantly getting in the way of a fair investigation of such crimes. Furthermore, the organizations that collect information and carry out investigations of crimes that have been committed by members of the armed forces and the paramilitary groups that are in favor of the authorities are themselves being charged with fomenting hatred against the Ukrainian state. Since 2017, in the Donetsk and Lugansk republics, there are special commissions to collect evidence and testimony of crimes committed by Ukrainian armed forces in those areas and to defend the victims. In just the period after 2017, these organizations have submitted 1,539 official requests for investigation of crimes committed by Ukrainian armed forces to be dealt with by Ukrainian courts or the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg. But Anatoly Matias, the General Prosecutor of Ukraine, and the head of the mission, Mathilde Bonner, opened a legal proceedings against Malakhova and Kopov, and this was done on the basis of Article 258/3 of the Ukrainian Criminal Code, organization of a terrorist group. So it turns out that for the fact that an international organization is collecting information to submit it to the judiciary, you can end up being labeled a terrorist. And this charge has a far-reaching consequence. In accordance with the prevailing procedures, Ukrainian citizens have to go through all of the national jurisdictions before they can appeal to international courts. And now, after this accusation, this official accusation against human rights defenders, it will be very difficult for other groups to do similar work because they will be afraid of being labeled terrorists. And Vitaly Galakov and Ivan Kopov are in fact being prevented from protecting the rights of citizens to be defended, and other people are being intimidated and will not be doing the same thing. So I would call on the OSCE to draw attention to this, to pay attention to this, and to protect the rights of those human rights defenders who are doing difficult daily work in Ukraine. Thank you.
I now give the floor to the Islamic Renaissance Party of Tajikistan, to be followed by Canada.
Madam Moderator, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, I want to list some recommendations. We suggest that OSCE participating states, at least some of them, kickstart the Moscow mechanism in relation to Tajikistan. There's hate, there's intolerance, the issue of prisoners of conscience, and the banning of political parties. Those topics should be covered. Number two, the OSCE should harness its existing experience and existing mechanisms to reduce the level of hate and intolerance reigning between the government and society as a whole, which has been on the rise for a number of years. Why are these issues so important? Hate and intolerance, unfortunately, are being whipped up in Tajikistan on a regular basis. Constantly, and very often, the consequences of this are dire. In May of this year, in Aghdad, not too far from Dushanbe, 4 political and religious leaders, including members of my party, were murdered. These were hate crimes. This was intolerance. According to the authorities, ISIS members killed them. They were all detained in one facility. However, some time before this tragedy happened, the president, Mr. Emomali Rahmon, said on television that these political and religious leaders who were subsequently murdered were accused of being Shia, although they were all Sunnis. He also accused them of betraying their faith and betraying their motherland. Thus, he accused them and basically sentenced them to the death penalty because they were, at that time, behind bars next to ISIS members. They weren't simply stabbed, they were decapitated. We believe that this climate of hate, especially when it's fomented by the state and the government, is absolutely unacceptable. And here at this conference, you've witnessed for yourselves all of the aspersions, all of the hate cast upon dissenters, political parties, myself, and other members of my party, Group 24, and also the National Alliance. Many representatives of the official delegation and so-called NGOs came here with the sole objective of calling us terrorists, extremists, painting us as the bad guy. In fact, when we've taken the floor, as we're speaking here today, the parents of at least 5 members here, 5 members of the party here, are being questioned by the law enforcement authorities back home. My brother, my sister, many other relatives. Why are we asking the OSCE to kickstart the Moscow mechanism? And why are we requesting that we reduce the level of hate, the level of intolerance in Tajikistan? Because we all know what the end result could be. We could have the same result as we had in that prison in Tajikistan. Thank you.
Much. I now give the floor to Canada, to be followed by the Human Rights Development Center.
Thank you, Moderator. Canada offers the following recommendations for this session: that all participating states use disaggregated data when compiling hate crime data, recognizing the critical importance of disaggregated data to an effective approach to countering hate crime. And secondly, that participating states make use of both police-reported hate crime data as well as non-governmental information and civil society information, acknowledging that not all hate crimes are reported to police and that civil society has a key role to play in combating hate crimes. Moderator, hate crimes in Canada make up approximately 0.1% of crimes reported to the police, but recent trends are a cause for greater vigilance. In 2018, police reported 1,798 criminal incidents in Canada that were motivated by hate. While this number represents a decrease of 13% over the high of 2017, it still represents an upward trend seen in bias-motivated crime in Canada since 2014. Engagement with communities and people with lived experiences of discrimination has shown that Black Canadians, Muslims, and Jews, as well as sexual minorities, experience hate crimes disproportionately to other groups. Research also shows that hate crimes targeting sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression were more likely to be violent than those targeting other Canadians. Police reporting is only one measurement of hate crimes, however. The General Social Survey on Canadian Safety, which is undertaken every 5 years, collects data based on the perceptions of individuals as to whether or not a crime has occurred and what the motivation for that crime may have been. In the latest survey in 2014, in 5% of all incidents reported to the survey, the victims believed that the incident was motivated by hate. And in the cases reported, race was the most common reported motivation at 51% of the total, while sex was registered at 26% of the time and religion 11% of the time. To counter hate crimes in Canada, a range of governmental and non-governmental initiatives have been undertaken at a national and local level, such as Canada's Anti-Racism Strategy 2019 to 2022, which is guided by a vision of Canada where all Canadians benefit from equal access to and participation in the economic, social, cultural, and political sphere. Many police services in large cities have specialized hate crime units composed of officers and/or civilians that have special training in order to support frontline officers, conduct hate crime-specific investigative work, and educate other police officers and the community. Additionally, a growing number of jurisdictions provide online systems for citizens to report hate crimes or non-criminal hate incidents. Many cities also have local anti-racism or anti-hate committees that work closely with police. It is critical to recognize that civil society organizations complement governments in combating intolerance and discrimination through the monitoring and reporting of hate crimes. The contribution of non-governmental organizations include the ability of citizens to report hate incidents to an NGO rather than to police. NGOs also raise awareness by providing online educational courses for students and workshops for professionals to teach about multiculturalism, which we think is a very good thing and part of Canada, as well as human rights. We must continue working with civil society to counter the threat of hate as we see today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Human Rights Development Center, to be followed by Eurasian Dialogue Institution.
Thank you, dear moderator. Today's topic, the hate speech, is very relevant to Azerbaijani political life. That's why I would like to dedicate my speech about the relevant issue, about this issue, which is now very popular language in Azerbaijani political life. The issue is that today there are a group of political immigrants who are living in Europe, and they are using online media and insulting political figures, government officials, and other people through online media. And this is a very challenging issue because they already got a status of living in Europe. They have a citizenship, or they're like asylum seekers. They back up in Europe and using social media platforms, and every day swearing, insulting, and using hate speech against the popular people in our country. And it has turned to very traditional in Azerbaijani political life. That's why, as an alarm case, I would like to raise this issue. And against most of these people has been opened a criminal case by the prosecution of Azerbaijan. And it's almost impossible to make any comments in social networks, in online media, because suddenly we face with an attack, with a swear campaign, with a hate campaign by these people to normal politicians in Azerbaijan. That's why I call all international organizations, the relevant government agencies in Europe to deal with this issue and to bring this issue into the norm, into the political norm, because normally in a political life cannot be such kind of language, which is against all the norms. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Eurasian Dialogue Institution, to be followed by Tajik Center for Human Rights.
Am Institut, hat nicht da. Ich kann. Herr Aziz nicht da im Institution.
In fact, the Eurasian Dialogue Institution is absent.
I will move on to the Eurasian Dialogue Institution. No?
No.
Okay. I will move on to the Tajik Center for Human Rights, to be followed by Azerbaijan.
Vielen Dank, Herr Moderator.
Thank you very much, moderator. My name is Suleyman Fozif, and I heard a woman taking the floor. I'm not sure what organization she was representing, but she said that I had worked for 22 years for some organization, but no, in fact, I'm only 22 years old. I don't know what organization she was representing. But everybody talks about terrorism, extremism, and so on. But someone said that the government had killed 22 members of his family. 22 members of his family. And then he was labeled a terrorist. But I mean, who's a terrorist, him or us? In Tajikistan, it's all upside down.
Hate crimes, the complementary roles of civil society and participating states. I give the floor back to the speaker.
Okay. Dies ist nicht der Fall, wenn
Well, in fact, the government of Tajikistan cannot be charged. Crimes are committed. And it really, I have a point of...
Kindly ask you, speaker, to speak on topic.
Ich weiß,
I note the point of order. I return the floor back to the speaker.
اوكي شوية moment. Am 10 سبتمبر endete
In September, there was a trial against Shakin Makhinov, someone belonging to a religious organization that has been banned in the country. I believe he was a Jehovah's Witness. And this individual was found guilty of a hate crime, and he was sentenced to 7.5 years of imprisonment. And last year, when we met at the same HDIM conference, the dictator president had in fact brought a member of the Islamic Party of Tajikistan. And so this individual has been sentenced to a very long term in prison.
erwähnte Politischen Gefangen der in
In the country, we do in fact have political prisoners. And apparently the speaker is reading a translation that was probably done by software and isn't always fully meaningful.
By the Orthodox Church of Ukraine. I would remind the current speaker that you can submit your full statement for the record through documents management. The floor to Azerbaijan.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. I'll talk about one of the brutal consequences of the hate crime is the genocide. A genocide begins the killing of one man, not for what he has done, but because of who he is. Nobel laureate Kofi Annan once said in a speech, Armenian extremists have long been feeding the fabricated illusion of establishing of Great Armenia from the Mediterranean Sea to the Caspian Sea. Inspired by the materialization of this mythical idea, they intermittently committed widespread bloodshed against the Turkish Muslim population in different spots of this geography. Likewise, Azerbaijan was no exception. Between March and April 1918, armed Armenian formations mercilessly killed tens of thousands of innocent civilians based on their ethnic and religious affiliations. The discovery of mass graves in Guba region of Azerbaijan in 2007 reasserts a glimpse of the extent of inhumanity against Azerbaijanis. Unfortunately, it was not enough for Armenian vandal groups in 20th century. As a result, in the end of 1990s, Armenia occupied 20% of Azerbaijan's territory, killed 20,000 individuals, expelled about 1 million people from their homeland. Extremist Armenian barbarity reached its apex in Khojaly on February 25-26 February 1992 when they recommitted genocide against Azerbaijanis in a small town. A total of 613 people from Khojaly, including women, children, and elderly, were tortured to death. It should be particularly noted that the Khojaly events took place in a period when the former President Serge Sarkisyan of the Republic of Armenia served as the head of the illegal military structures in the occupied Azerbaijani territories. The following words by Sarkisyan leave no doubt as to the question of the perpetrator of the crime in Khojaly. Before Khojaly, the Azerbaijanis thought that they were joking with us. They thought that the Armenians were people who could not raise their hand against the civilian population. We were able to break that stereotype, and that's what happened. There are sufficient grounds to conclude that the former and new government of the Republic of Armenia subordinate forces, for which it's liable under international law, are responsible for serious violations of international humanitarian and human rights law amounting to crimes under international law. Ongoing Armenian aggression against Azerbaijan, as well as the Khojaly genocide, demonstrates that Armenia is still obsessed with the consummation of the mythical agenda of the fabricated Great Armenia. Maybe our delegates can arise some questions that do we have ethnic Armenian population in Azerbaijan? Of course we have. More than 30,000 ethnic Armenians are living in peaceful in our country nowadays. What about Armenia? How many ethnic Azerbaijans living in Armenia? I will reply you, 0. Their hate, brutality, and lies relying on brute force have never benefited anyone. It's our hope, humanity, and truth with reliance on overwhelming power that will benefit all. Thank you for information. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Orthodox Church of Ukraine, to be followed by ADF International.
Microphone, please. Ladies and gentlemen, religious freedoms and human rights are inextricable components of a democratic society. There should be no discrimination on the basis of religion or nationality. I was born and bred in Crimea, and I can tell you about instances of persecution going on in Crimea on the basis of religion and nationality. It is the Russian authorities who committed these acts. This began in 2014, targeting Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars. The Vladimir and Olga Church in Simferopol is a Ukrainian spiritual and religious center. Currently, the Russian authorities in Crimea are knocking down this church. And in fact, our community, the Ukrainian Orthodox community, is on the brink of annihilation. In fact, it's a genocide. By committing these acts, the Russian authorities are violating international law and the Geneva Conventions. For instance, in the village of Prevalno, churches have been handed over to the Moscow Patriarchate. This occurred after Russian soldiers entered the village. The same occurred in Sevastopol. A few years ago, the Ukrainian Orthodox community received some land to build a church. A few years later, the Crimean authorities handed this land over to a Catholic community in Simferopol so they could build their own church. A court then handed down a decision saying that this land now needed to be given back to the government, and the church was to be knocked down. The rationale for this was that we were not legally registered. This means that we're now being threatened with criminal proceedings.
Role of civil society and participating states, and ask you to return to the topic. I return the floor to the speaker.
We call on the international community to condemn the activities of the Russian Federation as they have fomented hate on the basis of religion and to prevent the destruction of this church in Crimea. We want to urge the OSCE to get its member to uphold its obligations as per international law and also to allow a monitoring mission to work in the Crimea. Thank you.
I now turn the floor over to ADF International, to be followed by Institute of Legal Policy and Social Protection, named in the honor of Irina Brezhina.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My name is Alice Neff, and I represent ADF International, a legal organization dedicated to protecting fundamental freedoms, including the freedom of religion. ADF International was founded to protect and promote the inherent dignity of all people. We consider that acts of violence are deplorable and should be condemned. We join our colleagues from organizations monitoring crimes against Christians in deploring and condemning the steep increase of such acts throughout Europe. For instance, it is estimated that anti-Christian acts increased in France by 250% between 2008 and 2018. Acts against people of all faiths must be addressed. However, we caution against the unchecked promulgation of laws seeking to criminalize hate. It is necessary in a democratic society to prohibit acts of physical violence and the destruction of private property. However, it is difficult to legislate against hate without interfering with fundamental freedoms of individuals. Hate cannot be defined objectively, and legal tests often rely on a subjective conclusion of an individual. In courts, this may lead to the verdicts oscillating between denial of justice and wrongful accusation. Introducing subjective notion of hate undermines fundamental freedom, most often freedom of expression. For instance, we see with hate speech legislation that the circular definition of hate speech as incitement to hatred delegitimizes the rightly criminalized incitement to violence into a blank right to not be offended. Therefore, we suggest that rather to criminalize hate, to take actions which would tackle the roots of discrimination. Only a response tackling the shrinking space afforded to the exercise of fundamental freedoms, which is the real underlying issue allowing so-called hate crimes, can be effective. Throughout our work, we see that Christians are challenged and prevented from exercising their most fundamental rights. Christian parents cannot ensure that their children are educated in according to their convictions. Christian professionals are not reasonably accommodated in their workplace. Christians, more generally, express their religious beliefs under a rising threat of loss of reputation, disciplinary sanctions, dismissal, and even criminal sanctions. We see legislation and its interpretation, which limits the fundamental freedoms of Christians, sending the society a message that Christians are not equals and have to at least partly renounce their rights. Therefore, ADF International urges the OSCE and all participating states to reaffirm Principle 16b of the OSCE Vienna concluding document, stressing the need to foster, and here I cite, foster a climate of mutual tolerance and respect between believers of different communities as well as between believers and non-believers. We urge the OSCE and participating states to make fostering respect between believers of different communities and non-believers their priority. By properly protecting and respecting the rights to freedom of religion or belief, expression, and the rights of assembly, make Christians and other religious groups less vulnerable to attacks and assaults by private individuals. And this will help to foster a climate of tolerance without recourse to subjective ideas. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn the floor over to Institute of Legal Policy and Social Protection, named in the honor of Irina Brezhna, to be followed by Association of Relatives of Kremlin Political Prisoners.
I head up the Ukrainian Institute of Legal Policy and Social Protection, named in the honor of Irina Berezhna, and I would like to express gratitude to the organizers of this particular session, because the actions of NGOs are very important. We need to cooperate closely with the state to root out hate crimes. And that's very topical in Ukraine, because unfortunately in my country there is a societal conflict in Donbass, and the extent of hate crimes is probably exceptionally high in Ukraine. We've heard many examples, but there is virtually one hate crime every day, at least, unfortunately. Now, insofar as interaction with NGOs is concerned, I would divide NGOs into two categories. There are those that have been set up for specialized purposes. They're civil society organizations, and they are in fact cooperating with the Ministry of Internal Affairs, with the armed forces, with the police forces, and these NGOs are even financed by ministries. Our Ministry of Youth and Sport funds a number of NGOs, but also by local governments. And what is the function of these NGOs? In fact, they are given immunity, they're given indulgence to commit hate crimes. If it is required for the government to prevent a political meeting from taking place, I mean, the authorities can't do this because of freedom of speech. But these neo-Nazi radical right organizations come in and they do the dirty work. And this is systematic. We heard from a Minister of Internal Affairs, and he says that the indicator has declined. But I can give you examples. We know of many different hate crimes that are simply not reported and not registered. Burning down churches, beating people up for religious reasons. There's no investigation of this. And the function of the police forces, in fact, is reduced to nothing. They don't want to investigate this. Now, human rights defenders like me and others are in fact attacked through court proceedings. We're lawyers and we managed to defend ourselves, but the Nazi rightists are never charged. Now, the other category of NGOs that should be working to prevent such hate crimes is clear, I mean the real ones, but unfortunately there are no official clear-cut mechanisms for them to do this. But at least at the level of ODIHR, there could be some recommendations drawn up for a participating state. First of all, the participating of NGOs in the drafting of new laws and in other measures that are taken to reduce hate crime.
Relatives of Kremlin political prisoners, to be followed by NGO sociologist.
Уважаемые участники.
Distinguished participants, thank you for giving me the floor. First and foremost, I want to respond to the previous speaker's statement. In my country, in Ukraine, from where I traveled to this meeting, there is no civil conflict. And this is what President Zelensky stated earlier today, speaking from the High Rostrum of the UN. Our organization of relatives of Kremlin political prisoners, well, in fact, we're reaping the fruits of the aggression waged by the Kremlin. The Russian Federation has committed crimes, including the administrative occupation of the Crimea, and also hate crimes being committed against Ukrainians. According to our data, in the Crimea, in Russia, there are over 100 Ukrainians being held for political reasons, and this is basically hate crime. The Russian Federation, and this is something the OSCE has corroborated, is using torture, inhumane methods and treatment, as well as torture, physical and psychological. Roughly 2 weeks ago, 11 Ukrainian citizens, including my brother, Evgeny Palov, as well as many other prominent figures such as Oleg Sentsov, they were freed from Russian prisoners. However, the Russian Federal Security Bureau continues to prosecute Ukrainians. For instance, in Crimea, the occupying powers have put up figures of some individuals online, and there is now a witch hunt. There were photos of MPs who actively helped soldiers in the Donbass. Some of these people were then detained, including one person on the border between Crimea and continental Ukraine. This man, Vladimir, was then tortured. They forced him to breathe in noxious chemicals. A gun was put to his head. He was stripped naked. He was stretched. His hips, his arms, his legs, his thighs were beaten, as was his face. They showed him photographs of his wife and children and threatened to enact reprisals against them. They were torturing him so that he would give up information about MPs with whom he was posing on the photographs that were put up on the internet. My brother was also tortured. However,
Crime, the complementary roles of civil society and participating states. I give the floor back to the speaker.
Yes.
Thank you very much. There are many, many similar cases, over 100. We call on the OSCE to demand that the Russian Federation ceases to persecute Ukrainians on the basis of their nationality, both in Crimea and in the Russian Federation. We want an end to all torture. We want proper investigations of all instances of torture. We want 100 Ukrainians being detained to be freed. We want medical assistance provided to those detained. And we want an international monitoring mission, the ICIC, the UN, and the OSCE, to be able to work in the Crimea. Thank you.
Now give the floor to NGO sociologist, to be followed by the Association of Tajik Youth in the Russian Federation.
Спасибо. Рустам Хайдаров.
Thank you very much. My name is Haydarov from Tajikistan with the Sociologist NGO. We have heard that the government of Tajikistan is inciting hatred within the society. This was referred to by the Islamic Renaissance Party. But is it a hatred to the Soviet regime or communist? I mean, was that the basis for combating that regime? I mean, this was hatred. Second, in 1992, this party took power and it set up a so-called National Alliance government, but there were those who were not happy with the fact that the constitutional regime was changing and that the Islamists wanted to set up an Islamic state. And as we see in practice, Islamists are always intolerant of those who come out against their ideas. And so they had a 6-month blockade of the oblast, which didn't want to accept their coming to power. They showed no solidarity with the people living in the oblast, even though they were fellow Muslims.
I return the floor to the speaker.
Yes, but as I was saying, this is hatred. It's crimes based on hatred because it's simply hatred of people who think differently. In Tajikistan, in 1992, we had 11,000 Bukhara Jews, but the life of these Bukhara Jews in Tajikistan was under threat when the Islamic Renaissance Party came to power, and the crimes committed against them on the basis of anti-Semitism caused them to leave the country, let me quote from a Russian newspaper of 1992. The 1992 is a year in which armed groups are acting with full impunity and threatening Jewish families with death, and as a result they are fleeing the country. So the hatred that is at the basis of this party is something that they are continuing to foment here from their bases in the European Union. They are inciting hatred and they are threatening people who are in favor of a secular way of life in Tajikistan, who want to have a constitution with separation of religion and state. But we're all Tajiks, will always be proud of our nation, our language, and our culture, and I hope that the people of the Islamic Renaissance Party will keep that in mind. Thank you.
Floor to the Association of Tajik Youth in the Russian Federation, to be followed by Ukraine.
Good afternoon, Madam Moderator, participants. Thank you for giving me the floor. My name is Sobayov, and I represent Tajikistani youth currently getting education in the Russian Federation. Over 40,000 Tajikistani students are currently studying in Russia. Of course, we are opposed to discrimination and any kind of intolerance. In Russia, we always speak out against these phenomena. That is, hate crime. The topic at hand, hate crime and the role of civil society in combating this phenomenon. As a representative of civil society, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that there are members of the Islamic Renaissance Party participating in OSCE ODIHR meetings. Now, they've committed thousands of hate crimes. For the most part, this was religiously motivated hate crime. And it is not only Tajikistan citizens who fell victim to these crimes. One of the latest crimes they committed, and this was in 2018, the Islamic Renaissance Party, in fact, killed 3 EU citizens and 1 US citizen. I'm calling on the OSCE as a reputable international organization to listen to what we're saying and to prevent these groups from using the OSCE as a platform for spreading their ideas and to stop them from committing any further crimes. I myself is a representative of young people, but there are representatives of many other NGOs, civil society organizations, 8 or 10 of them. They've all called for ensuring that these groups who actually seek to stamp out civil society, those who are opposed to freedom and development, we don't want them being able to use the OSCE as a rostrum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Ukraine and would then turn back to the Yazidi Center for Human Rights if they have returned to the room.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I will start from the recommendations. ODIHR HCNM to monitor situation in Russia, to form the comprehensive program for this participating state to address the root causes of the rise of violent radicalism, neo-Nazism and xenophobia, to comply with the OSCE principles and commitments and international obligations in the area of combating hate crimes, intolerance and discrimination. HCNM, ODIHR, RFOM to combine the efforts within existing mandates because of interrelation of different aspects of restrictions of human rights and fundamental freedoms in the Russian Federation that lead to further worsening of the situation of the national minorities in that country. ODIHR HCNM Special Monitoring Mission of Ukraine to ensure close monitoring and reporting on human rights situation in the temporarily occupied by Russia Autonomous Republic of Crimea, city of Sevastopol, and certain areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine, namely the cases of hate crimes on religious grounds, to help to restore the respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms in the affected regions in the situation of occupation. HCNM and ODIHR to use all assets at their disposal and closely monitor the situation and implementation of the recommendation contained in their 2015 Human Rights Assessment Monitoring Report on Crimea. ODIHR and OSCE Secretariat to present recommendations to participating states on establishment of respective international mechanism of investigation of reported human rights violations, hate crimes and abuses in Chechnya, identifying the OSCE rapporteur's report under the Moscow mechanism on alleged human rights violations and impunity in the Chechen Republic of the Russian Federation. Distinguished participants, a matter of utmost concern for us is the link between Russia's external aggression and the tendencies inside that country marked by strengthening of aggressive nationalism, xenophobia, and intolerance, which represent a vital ingredient for pursuit of Russia's expansionist and neo-imperial policy. Let me offer a quotation from the text of the opinion by the Advisory Committee on the Framework Convention for the Protection of National Minorities prepared within the fourth monitoring cycle in Russia. I quote, "Since the annexation of Crimea and conflict in eastern Ukraine, Russian government-controlled media are fueling a patriotic mobilization of society against Ukraine. The Advisory Committee is concerned that this discourse risks sidelining not only persons belonging to the Ukrainian national minority, but also anyone not aligning with the majority, including persons belonging to other national minority groups," end of quote. Anti-Ukrainian sentiments and propaganda actively fueled by Russian state media are everyday realities endangering the safety of Ukrainians. Unfortunately, this is also the case for this meeting. The resurgence of anti-Semitism in Russia has been manifested in statements of politicians, including from State Duma, together with the most recent revival of Judophobic myths of the past. In 2018, at least 56 people became victims of hate crimes in the Russian Federation, motivated by racist and neo-Nazi ideology. 4 of them were killed, 21 acts of vandalism took place. We are deeply alarmed that the violent manifestation of xenophobia and intolerance, hate crimes and hate speech increasingly target Ukrainian citizens in the Russian Federation. Anti-Ukrainian sentiments and hateful propaganda, actually fueled by Russian media, are everyday realities in Russia, endangering the safety of Ukrainians. One of the last victims, Dynamo Kyiv trainee who was beaten by neo-Nazis in Chelyabinsk, and family members of the famous Russian blogger of Ukrainian origin, Yuri Dud, who were beaten in Moscow. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've reached the end of the speakers list. I would give one more call for the Yazidi Center for Human Rights if they are in the room. Seeing that they are not, I am moving on to right of reply. The first right of reply will be Georgia, to be followed by Tajikistan. You will have 2 minutes for the right of reply. I give the floor
Yes,
to
thank
Georgia.
you, Moderator. I would like to have a remark on the statement of European Center for Democracy and Development. Regrettably, for the second time in a row this session, on the very important topic was used to voice a groundless accusation attempting to legitimize military aggression of the Russian Federation against Georgia and following the occupation. I would like the moderator to ask you to intervene in the similar situation. I believe that it's needless to enter into the discussion who and when started the war in 2008. It is clear to the whole international community, and I won't take additional time from our session on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Tajikistan, to be followed by Latvia.
Госпожа модератор, спасибо.
Madam Moderator, to begin with, I would like to introduce some clarity regarding comments made by one speaker. There is no prohibition of valid groups, only terrorist and extremist groups if they are so identified by courts. We have met in the corridors here. We've told the representatives of this group that they could become registered. We advised them on how to proceed. Regarding Mr. Hakimov, they have submitted an official complaint, and that will be dealt with in accordance with usual procedures. Insofar as the Islamic Renaissance Party is concerned, I mean, how cynical for them to talk about hate crimes when they officially printed a huge number of articles and books and brochures that incited hatred. We have provided actual quotes, and there's been no reaction to that. They refer to Tajikistan as an area of war, of infidels. I'm quoting. And those who live on the territory of Tajikistan are referred to as enemies, even if they are Muslims. But if they don't join the party, then they are enemies. Their property needs to be taken away and their blood spilled. I mean, these are actual quotes from their publications. And they are cynically stating now that there is hate speech in Tajikistan. But they were the ones who used hate speech constantly. And now they are trying to put themselves forward as victims. And we really feel that we must react to such statements because they are unacceptable.
Turn to Latvia, to be followed by Estonia.
Thank you. In reply to Russian Federation and the representative of Fund for Legal Support and Protection of Compatriots' Rights Abroad, I have the following remarks. During and after World War II, Latvia came under the occupation of two totalitarian regimes, those of the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. Through repression and terror, Nazi and Soviet powers forcibly drafted many people in the occupied Latvia to join the armed force of one or the other state. The state of Latvia has been consistent in condemning the crimes against humanity committed by both totalitarian regimes. Latvia denounces the Holocaust and mourns its victims. As a democratic country, Latvia respects and also guarantees freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. 16 March is not an official Remembrance Day, and people on their own private initiative pay their respect to the fallen soldiers. The senior officials and members of the government do not participate in those commemorative gatherings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Estonia, to be followed by France.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Estonia would like to exercise the right of reply and respond shortly to the misleading remarks presented by the Fund for Legal Support and Protection of Compatriots' Rights Abroad and the Russian delegation. Estonian government has repeatedly condemned the crimes and the ideology of all totalitarian regimes in the strongest possible terms. Estonia rejects and deplores any glorification of ideologies, war crimes, and crimes against humanity perpetrated by such regimes. and is working together with international community to raise awareness of these atrocities. In addition, let me remind you that the verdict at the Nuremberg trials declared that the SS, including the Waffen-SS, was a criminal organization, but the definition did not extend to those individuals who were forcibly conscripted into the Waffen-SS. According to the decision of the Nuremberg tribunals, this category includes individuals in the occupied territory of the Republic of Estonia who were conscripted by the occupation authorities in a way that is against international law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to France, to be followed by Austria.
Merci, Madame. Thank you, Madam Moderator. I would like to exercise the right of reply of this delegation in order to respond to a number of statements, including the one made by the Russian Federation, and I will stress 4 points. First, anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, anti-Christian, homophobe, anti-Roma, whatever, all acts of intolerance and discrimination are condemned forcefully by the French authorities, and appropriate judicial proceedings are open. Second, in March of 2018, France adopted its third National Action Plan to combat racism and anti-Semitism, and it covers the period from 2018 to 2020. This is our compass, it's our roadmap. All ministries are involved in combating hate speech on the internet, ensuring education about stereotypes, and finding new areas for mobilization. We are deploying this plan in a very determined manner in order to combat impunity, cowardice, and hatred. And we know that we can count in this combat on thousands of French associations. Third, let us keep in mind that the objective of today's session is to improve the action of the OSCE in combating hate crime, and this delegation deplores strongly the fact that a number of statements made today did not contribute to this objective at all. Freedom of speech is not freedom to hate. Racism is not an opinion. You cannot build a stable, peaceful society with solidarity on hatred for others. As a fourth point, let me remind you yet again that in France, the principle of secularity means that the state is not religious. The state does not take any position between believers and non-believers. Religion is a freedom to be exercised or not to be exercised. In the area of conviction, everyone is free to choose whether they believe or do not, and in what they believe. Thank you for your attention.
I now give the floor to Austria, to be followed by Belgium.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Since Austria has been mentioned in this session, I would like to use my right of reply to add the following remarks. As already stated yesterday, Austria is firmly committed to the fight against racism, intolerance, and discrimination, as enshrined or in line with all major human rights instruments and the Austrian Constitution. Austria has a robust legal framework in response to incidents of hate crime. In addition, in 2017, specialized units were set up in the public prosecution offices in order to conduct criminal proceedings in these cases in a more effective and efficient manner. Also, with regard to hate speech, several mechanisms are in place. They have the task to monitor developments of hate speech, provide information on prevention and first aid measures, reporting points, and counseling centers. The Austrian delegation stands ready to share further details with all interested participants. For further measures, especially on prevention and education, I would like to refer to our statement circulated after yesterday's working session 13. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Belgium, to be followed by Finland on behalf of the EU.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Distinguished representatives of civil society, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to take the floor so that Belgium can exercise its right of reply, responding to some of the remarks made over the course of this session. We are committed to the principle of freedom of religion and to fundamental values in democratic societies. As per the Belgian Constitution, we fully subscribe to the recommendations that the OSCE has issued in this sphere, but there are also recommendations coming out from other organizations. Fundamental freedoms and the freedom of religion are the bedrock of our society. Belgium is committed to the freedom of expression as enshrined in our constitution. This liberty, this freedom is absolutely vital for our societies to work properly and to combat incitement to hatred. which is one of the violations of freedom of expression. We are applying the legislation in our books to combat Holocaust denial, intolerance. We're also combating anti-Semitism, hate crime. We're taking every step to combat these scourges, especially by establishing a special task force and also via the use of a handbook that was published by ODIHR in this sphere. We also cooperate with key actors such as the Jewish community, the police, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Finland on behalf of the European Union, to be followed by Ukraine.
Thank you. I pass the floor to the representative of the EU delegation.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. We'd like to reiterate once more our firm support for the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Georgia within its internationally recognized borders, as well as for the policy of non-recognition and engagement concerning the Georgian regions of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. As the resolution of the European Parliament from 2008 was mentioned by one speaker in this context, we would like to recommend him to read it in full, together with all other resolutions related to Georgia, including the one from 14 June 2008, and not to mislead the audience. In reply to some remarks questioning again the need of addressing hate crimes, we would like to reiterate that within the EU, the Council Framework Decision from 2008 on combating certain forms and expression of racism and xenophobia by means of criminal law sets the frame for a common response to hate speech and hate crime. This instrument obliged the EU member states to penalize the public incitement to violence or hatred against a group of persons or a member of such a group defined by reference to race, color, religion, descent, or national or ethnic origin, which shall also be punishable if committed by public dissemination or distribution of pictures or other material. Furthermore, for any other criminal offenses, member states must ensure that racist and xenophobic motivation is considered as an aggravating circumstance, or alternatively that such motivation may be taken into account in the determination of the penalties. As we did in the previous session, we would like to draw again the attention to the Athens Ministerial Council Decision 909 on combating hate crimes, where all OSCE participating states acknowledge that hate crimes are criminal offenses committed with a biased motive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Ukraine, to be followed by the United States of America.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. At the outset, I would like to resolutely reject any allegations and disinformation, including on statistical data of Russia and its gongos from different countries of the OSCE on any connection of government and or any authorities of my country to neo-Nazism, neo-fascism, or aggressive nationalism. Secondly, as for the new canonic Orthodox Church of Ukraine, I would like to state that in January this year, Ukrainian nation succeeded in its at least 100 years quest for establishment of a national autocephalous Orthodox Church of Ukraine. This status was granted to the Ukrainian people by the Mother Church, the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople. This church is under attack in the occupied Crimea, and it was stated during this session. Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine adopted the law which enables the religious communities to change their affiliation and strengthens the religious freedom of the believers. The law protects the interests of those believers who wish to stay within the Russian Orthodox Church. This church will continue to have the same rights and commitments as other religious denominations in my country. At the same time, a legislative provision was introduced which required religious organization with governing body in the aggressor state or occupying power as determined by Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine to show this link in their names. There are 6 such religious organizations in Ukraine. There is no limitation of their operation in Ukraine. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I now turn to the United States of America, to be followed by Armenia.
The United States is a staunch supporter of the freedoms of expression, peaceful assembly and association, and religion or belief. No delegation has done more to protect freedom of expression while condemning the ideas with which we disagree. We condemn the glorification of Nazism and all forms of hatred, including anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, racism, and xenophobia. But we will continue to object when some seek to use these issues as a political tool to advance other agendas or as an excuse to unduly restrict fundamental freedoms. We also would like to recall that hate crimes and hate speech are not interchangeable. Speech, even hateful speech, is protected by the right to freedom of expression, except when it crosses the lines into violence or incitement to imminent violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Armenia, to be followed by the UK, which is the last right of reply I have.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I would like to exercise my right of reply in response to the statement made by the delegation of Azerbaijan. We heard the justification of the Armenian genocide by Azerbaijan. This creates serious existential threats for the people of Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenia will prevent any attempt to perpetrate genocide against the Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh by Azerbaijan. By such statements, Azerbaijan justifies absolute need to sustain existing security arrangements in Nagorno-Karabakh. The events in Khojalu, which led to unfortunate deaths of civilians, were the results of political intrigues and struggles for power in Azerbaijan. The true reasons of Khojalu are revealed in the accounts of Azerbaijanis themselves. Then the president of Azerbaijan, Ayaz Mutalibov, stated that the assault on Khojaly was not a surprise attack. He emphasized that corridor was kept open by Armenians for the people to live, but civilians were fired by armed units of the Popular Front of Azerbaijan. Mutalibov linked this criminal act to attempts by the opposition to remove him from the power. As far as the claims of Azeri representatives are concerned regarding 30,000 Armenians currently living in Azerbaijan, let me note that ECRI report, based on the official census carried out in 2009 in Azerbaijan, stated that only 700 people identified themselves as Armenians. Therefore, we encourage the Azerbaijani delegation to check their statements with the view to avoid contradiction with their own official data. ECRI report also expressed a concern that an entire generation of Azerbaijanis has grown up listening constant rhetoric of Armenians being #1 enemy of Azerbaijan. As a result, the Armenians living in the country need to hide. I thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to the United Kingdom, which I note is the last right of reply I have on my list.
Thank you. And in response to a speaker who referred to the levels of knife crime in London, we don't recognise the figures cited in his presentation, and we suggest that he refers to the detailed statistics freely available on www.gov.uk. Also, in response to any suggestion of complacency with regard to knife crime, or the suggestion that our focus on hate crime somehow negates or reduces our ability to focus on knife crime, gov.uk also provides useful detail and information on the government's response, including a recently launched consultation on strengthening knife crime prevention. Finally, we repeat our position that the UK remains committed to engaging with all actors to help build a more inclusive, tolerant and cohesive society, and to ensure that we live up to our OSCE commitments to combat all forms of discrimination. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now give the floor to Azerbaijan.
Armenian state policy is an aggression state policy. Armenia, the Nagorno-Karabakh, so-called Nagorno-Karabakh Republic, declared themselves as an independent country, but Nagorno-Karabakh, in the really, but and the international under the international law, is a territory of the Azerbaijan. But why you occupy the 7 adjacent regions? It's not Nagorno-Karabakh. 20% of our territory occupied by Armenia, and you are shamefully declared that Azerbaijani ethnic cleansed by up to the Armenians. No one person tell me living in Armenia or in Nagorno-Karabakh. 1 million person ethnic cleansed by Armenia, not by Azerbaijan. Tell me, are there any Azerbaijan, one man, tell me one man even, that living in Karabakh or in Armenia or in other regions. But in Azerbaijan, living 30,000 people in peacefully. In spite of that, you occupied, you genocide, you committed ethnic cleansing against Azerbaijani population. About that, as the UN Security Councils declared the 4 resolutions, there are declared that Armenian troops should be withdraw their troops out of the regions. But Armenian state don't pay attention at these declarations.
Thank you very much. We've now reached the end of right of reply, and I have the honor to give the floor back to our speaker to give us some final thoughts. Ms. Dragina Nazadin, a few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for this discussion. And I would like to go back to the question why we are actually discussing hate crimes and such, and why we are discussing the problems and opportunities that are given in the cooperation between civil society and the states. First of all, as was said several times, hate crimes affects not only one person that is a direct victim of that crime, but is actually the crime against the whole group. The cost of that crimes are very high, not only for that person, not only for the group that it is a member of, but also for the whole society, because the wounds are very deep and it is very, very difficult to heal it. We can also see that there is a great need for education on the hate crimes, and this education should be addressed not only to state officials and the civil society actors how to better understand the problem and how to learn how to cooperate, but also it can be addressed to media, for example. It is because it's very, very important to know how to report on the hate crimes and how to inform the society about it. The other thing that was also mentioned here is the problem of underreporting, and here I would really like to encourage all the member states to use the opportunity to report on the different international fora, including ODIHR platform, about the problem of hate crimes in their own country and about their readiness and attempts that they are taking in order to fight the hate crimes. One of the problems that is also very important is that we define hate crimes in a very different manner, and we also lead completely different systems of statistics. Therefore, I think the work that is done by civil society organization and civil society actors is crucial in order to understand what is the scale of the problem, but also in order to understand what is the real nature of this problem. My other recommendation would be connected with the fact that the freedom of expression problem was expressed several times during this session. And it's a very, very important topic. Nevertheless, we are not thinking only about hate speech as a criminal act. We are thinking as there is no agreement between OSCE countries about it. I personally stand on the position that there are much more effective measures to actually can be taken by society and by the politicians in order not to feed the hate, because there are different measures that can be taken, and one of them is definitely connected with education that could be part of the public education that is aiming to fight the prejudice and the stereotypes. But the other thing is, and this is my call to all political leaders, is actually to refrain from the hate speech, because it is very difficult, different message if it comes from the head of the states, and if any politician is actually allowing himself or herself to use the hate speech and discriminatory language against any member of minority groups or political opponents. This is definitely one of the moments when we can stop for a moment and think why we are so nervous about hate crimes. Definitely because we are ready to undermine the meaning of that kind of problems until it is not affecting ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We've now reached the end of the session. I would like to thank all our speakers and the audience for the lively session. Thank you very much to our interpreters. And a reminder to leave your headset and receiver in the room. I will now take a point of moderator privilege to note that this is my last moderation for a session at HDIM as the head of the Tolerance and Non-Discrimination Department. And I would like to thank all of you for your cooperation over the years. It's been a privilege. Thank you.